Hello everyone, it's Ben at TV Parts today, and I would like to be your DIY TV repair guide. In today's video, we're going to be going over the process of how to identify part numbers in our Sony TVs. We are going to be starting out with Sony mainboards, and when it comes to Sony mainboards, we are going to have to do a little bit of detective work. Sony uses a reference number printed onto a small sticker on the front of the mainboard, and that number is going to correspond to the actual Sony part number. This means in a lot of situations we are probably not going to see the actual part number printed anywhere on our mainboard. What we're going to have to do is take the reference number and we're going to have to punch it into a database like TV Parts Today's website to discover what the actual part number is. In a lot of situations, Sony will use a mainboard part number beginning with the letter A and then a string of numbers. In some rarer situations, we do see a part number beginning with the letter T and then a string of numbers. Or we could see a mainboard part number that is a 9-digit number separated by dashes. In almost every situation with newer Sony mainboards, we do see them using the style of part number that begins with the letter A. You've probably noticed that Sony tends to separate sections of the part number with dashes. When you search for those numbers on TV Parts Today's website, we do list them with the dashes and without the dashes just to make it a little bit easier to search for those part numbers. When we are swapping out a mainboard or a T-Con board for newer Sony units, we are going to have to do what's called a firmware update. The firmware update is where we take a new set of instructions and we upload it onto the mainboard so that we can ensure compatibility between the T-Con board, the mainboard, and the panel. This is a fairly complicated process where we will navigate to Sony's website, we'll punch in our model number, we'll have to download the firmware package from the website, upload it onto a USB drive, and then take that USB drive and insert it into one of the USB ports on our Sony mainboard while it's plugged in. This is not the most transparent process, but we here at TV Parts Today have a lot of experience with Sony firmware updates, so if you give us a call, we will be more than happy to walk you through the entire process. Thankfully, when it comes to Sony power supplies, the process for identifying the part number is much simpler. We are just going to have to locate a small sticker on the front of the power supply, and it usually has a part number beginning in 1-474. We also see a range of part numbers, anywhere from 1-001 all the way up to 1-020 in a lot of cases. And very rarely we will see a Sony power supply part number beginning in PLTV. But these are few and far between. Next, we will be covering Sony T-Con part numbers. Sony does tend to use T-Cons from many different brands of televisions. Sometimes we will see the identifier on the board that is a number that begins with 6871L. We can also see a partial part number embedded into a serial number for an identifier that begins with LJ94. We can also see the identifier beginning with 55 on some T-Con boards. And even some T-Con boards where the identifier begins with RUNTK. In almost every situation, Sony will apply its own Sony part number to the T-Con board. So for example, in the situation where we had the identifier that started in LJ94, the actual Sony part number will be 1-897-101-11. This does make things rather confusing in a lot of situations, but as long as we are getting the identifier and we can punch that into a database, like TV Parts Today's website, we should still get the appropriate listing to make sure that we are ordering the appropriate part for our repair. There are some fairly complicated processes for identifying part numbers for our Sony boards. If you are running into a situation where you are struggling or having issues, please feel free to reach out to TV Parts Today and we can help you out however we can. You can give us a call into our office at 930-212-1975, or you can send us an email to info@tvpartstoday.com. That's info@tvpartstoday.com. That's going to do it for today's video. Don't forget to like the video, leave us a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.